Hey, Jerry, thanks so much for making time. I'm so thrilled that you're able to share your wisdom and your journey with everybody today.
My pleasure, David. Absolutely. Great to be here.
All right. So my understanding is that you're currently the Executive Vice President of Strategic Partnerships at KiwiTech. Is that right?
That is correct. Yes, sir.
What's that mean? What do you do?
Absolutely. Well, basically, what it means is that we have built an ecosystem over the last 10 years that engages a lot of early stage companies at various levels of their evolution. And as with a lot of companies that, if you think about the way funds work, the way they have to vet prospective partners, in many ways, that's what I do. Now, because of our growth, we have a team of people who can do initial, due diligence, speak with people, really learn about what their needs are. But in the case of a company that's providing both technology services and help with capital, there you really need to vet them with somebody who has the experience of being through it. And so my role really is to interview, to engage, and to qualify these prospective partners. And then once that we meet that qualification process, to assist in actually bringing them on board and formalizing the partnership.
Mhm.
And that
Cool.
involves obviously dealing with, contracts and things of that nature. And of course, just basic business development, for sure.
Oh, that's
So,
awesome. So now I want to take you back and understand your journey. So
so
you're in high school and you're thinking, one day I want to be a strategic vice president of partnership. So help
well,
me understand. Take me way.
hard, hardly, David, hardly. And I want to preface this by saying that I don't advocate my journey for a lot of people, because in today's day and age, most people are very college bound. They build their career. And I will say that today, because of our society and the way things have evolved, more and more young people have a greater at least desire for what they want to be. I mean, there's so many people who start with a vision. I didn't start with any of that. I basically grew up in a pretty challenged economically household in the projects of Coney Island, Brooklyn, New York. Um, the closest thing that I had to a career was exposure to an uncle who was working as a typographer, a typesetter in the local daily newspaper. And so when I got into actually before high school, one of the vocational courses I took was typesetting, and I found that because I had an uncle who helped me understand what it was all about, that I kind of liked it. So when I went to high school, he had actually started his own typesetting shop right in Brooklyn, a few blocks away from my high school. So I was, I had worked, I had done all of the usual things of like working in a shoe store, working behind the counter in a luncheonette. But then when my uncle opened this typesetting company, I went to work for him for about $1 an hour. And I'm not kidding. That was what it was about. Doing menial jobs, but finding that, okay, I was learning something. And having come from more of uh, you might say a vocational kind of environment, a trades environment, you might say. My dad was a tradesman in the jewelry business. I felt, well, I'll learn a trade and maybe I'll have a career after high school. That evolved into something rather crazy, because while I was in my senior year of high school, not necessarily the best student in the whole world, my uncle's business started to grow rather dramatically. And he actually convinced me to quit high school and come to work for him. I did that. And then I had some sense knocked into me a couple of years later, because fortunately for me, I hung out with friends who were college bound. My best friend is now a doctor and was a doctor. So I went back, got my high school diploma, and went to Brooklyn College for a while in the evening. But family situations that prevailed, it made it very difficult for me to continue. And at this point in time, I was working pretty much full time in this printing plant and really learning a trade. What happened after that was that, fortunately, I was exposed to some really interesting technology innovations that were coming along in the graphic arts field. And I ended up working because working for families, can work. And I'm sure a lot of people have great relationships, but it also can fail. But fortunately, I had learned enough about my craft to get a job in New York City in a much more refined and advanced environment, where they were using mainframe computers to manage data that would ultimately feed a printing process. It would actually manage, if you think about the way directories or any kind of reference publications are created, you create a large repository of information, and then you feed that to a system that could turn that into typography. And again, we're talking pre-internet, and generate a printed product. And that's what they were doing. And I was, I was just a production rat. I was working in production and doing my thing. And one day, and this is an interesting thing, I think hopefully I'm not boring people, but it's interesting because I got tapped on the shoulder by a gentleman who was our VP of sales in that company. And he was a former IBM sales executive. So he was trained, with all the best of them. And he said, I like the way you're handling one of our clients, happened to be Billboard magazine, and I think you should go into sales. And I said, what? Me? I'm a production rat. I never thought about that. And the next thing you know, he said, you should give it a shot. I went home. I talked to my dad. I said, what do you think? And he said, you should do it. So I bought myself 3 suits over the weekend, showed up, and I started working in sales. And it changed my life. And I want to tell people that very, very much, because from being sort of in the confined environment of working in a production environment and thinking, okay, well, that wasn't so bad. I was working in a nice place. Wasn't necessarily making a lot of money, but I was a young guy. Thought I could continue to learn more about my craft. And now all of a sudden I find myself doing something completely different. And so that particular company went through, as it was a pretty early stage company, went through a lot of changes. And through those changes and through a lot of machinations and what have you, 17 years later, I became president of that company.
Wow.
Yeah.
What do you think it was that person, that IBM guy, a former IBM guy, recognized in you those qualities? What do you think as you look back?
It's a very good question. It was a quality that I had that I didn't quite recognize. And that was just the fact that I have a very service-driven kind of mentality. I like people and I like to see them satisfied. And so when I was working with this editor from Billboard magazine, helping him with galley proofs and things of that nature, this gentleman, this VP of sales, recognized that I was really encouraging this client to do more and more with us and be more and more comfortable in a competitive environment. Also, he was working on trying to bring in a big project with Bell Laboratories at the time, a big database management project for all of their instruction manuals for Bell Labs, which ultimately became Lucent, if you recall that transformation. And one night he was getting ready for a presentation the next day, and he was running into some trouble with samples. And I was the only one in the company who stayed behind and helped him because I wanted him to succeed. And he saw that in me, and he just felt that I would be trainable. And he didn't. The other thing that I guess worked for my favor, he didn't like the other salespeople in the company. He ultimately let them go. I didn't know that. But it turned out that all of a sudden I saw myself in a business role, really learning the other side of what I was doing. And at first, very nervous and very wet behind the ears, but really surprisingly for myself, really took to it and really started to enjoy it, and really saw that there were parts of my personality and my abilities that I never anticipated I would have. As a matter of fact, I had a very strong Brooklyn accent, and I worked very hard to break it because I didn't think that would be very popular in that setting. Maybe I still have some of it left. I don't know, David. You can
a little bit. I still hear it in you.
Okay, it's all right. So that company evolved, and as it evolved, I became more and more involved with it, and learned quite a bit, and really loved it. I really worked very hard, but I really loved what I did, and I found that it also gave me a sense of I never had the confidence that I could be a leader in that situation, but then more and more as I saw people reacting to me, and the owner of the company saw that people were really responding to me, and that I was, I built a sales force. Obviously, along the way, in 17 years, a lot of things happened. And in building a sales force and all of that, first elevation was vice president of sales. And then eventually the owner of the company said, I've got a lot of other businesses I've got to attend to that are not doing well. This one is doing well. A lot of it because of you, Jerry. So why don't you become president? Which is what I did.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And you did that for several years, you said?
Yes, and then basically what happened was that, again, as you probably know, a lot of domestic service companies were challenged by a lot of what was happening offshore. Um, and so eventually I ended up with a company called Atlas Publishing Services, which I was hired to run that company. They were based out of Silver Spring, Maryland. And this is kind of the link, David, to how I ended up at KiwiTech.
Cool.
If you like, I'd be happy to continue
Yeah,
to
yeah, please, please.
share that with you. So basically, again, if you think back to what we were doing in these companies, we were managing large databases, mostly for publishers. So think about directories, catalogs, any kind of reference, like drug manuals. One of my biggest clients were producing drug manuals after drug manuals, which required updating, rapid dissemination from data to being able to be published. Now, in the latter years, obviously, when we were doing that, we were also not only publishing for ink on paper, but we were also helping them disseminate this content digitally through the internet. So that was a big change in those decades between, let's say, the late 80s to 2000, where publishers were seeing that transition. They were still making their money on ink on paper, but they were very much dependent upon disseminating their content through the internet. So I was working for this company. I was named president of that company in 1993. And we had a contract with the National Library of Medicine for something called Medline. And Medline is basically a large database of every peer-reviewed medical journal article on the planet.
Wow.
It's cited in Medline. And the way it's cited initially is by citation and abstract, so that medical researchers, doctors, nurses, students, whatever, can go and find articles within their discipline, the discipline that they're studying. And initially, they'd have to go to the library and get that journal or have it sent to them. Now all of that is digitized through something called PubMed Central, so they're able to get it digitally. But we had this contract and we needed a subcontractor. And the subcontractor that we had wasn't doing such a great job, so I needed to find a new subcontractor. Hence, I started looking and I had to rebid this contract, and I ended up finding the founders of KiwiTech in their first endeavor. The name of their company was Aptara. They were a small family-run, as you might know, the people who own KiwiTech is a family-owned business. They were based out of Virginia, ultimately ended up in New Delhi and the US. And after doing a lot of vetting, I connected with them and I gave them this contract. So obviously they were very excited. This was a big deal for them. And what little did I know, folks, that I was their hero. So when we talk about connections with people, right? Wow, does this ever play out? So now advance forward, the situation with outsourcing becomes more and more the case. Atlas Publishing Services starts struggling. As much as we were doing great things for a lot of people, that contract comes to an end after about 14 years. And the next thing you know, I had to have Atlas Publishing Services merged in with another company, which I did successfully. I actually, one of the things I was very proud of was negotiating a very, very good merger of what was left of Atlas Publishing Services with a company called DataStream Content Solutions, which was basically leveraging government content and selling it to companies like LexisNexis and some of the big online service providers. That was going really, really well. Unfortunately, they got acquired by a public company, and that changed the culture of the company dramatically. It really did. It went from being a great place to go to work to like, oh my goodness. So I'm looking around. What am I going to do? I know this can't stay. And I start to search, and I find Rakesh Gupta now started a new company called KiwiTech. He's no longer running Aptara anymore. Well, this is the benefit of networking. I call him up. I say, what's new? He said, hey, Jerry, I'm in New York now. I said, wow, this is really where I want to be. Why don't you come meet me? I come meet him. And the next thing you know, I'm hired in 2012. So I'm just very proud to tell you that I just finished my 10th year with KiwiTech.
Oh, that's awesome. Congratulations, Jerry. I didn't realize you were 10 years there.
Yeah, 10 years.
This is an amazing, amazing story, an amazing journey. Thank you so much for sharing. As you look back on this, unique career. That's probably the only way I can describe it, right?
Thank you.
Um,
Yeah.
if you were to give yourself advice or guidance, looking
Mhm.
back at yourself at any given point in your career, what would it be?
Well, actually, it's a wonderful question. I think that I think it would be to really try to take an assessment of myself in a better way than I did. And I'll tell you why. When you come from very, very meager means, everything that you achieve is very precious to you. And sometimes you give up too much of it. And I think along the way, I believe I could have achieved the same and maybe even more had I balanced my work and private and personal life a little bit better. I think a work-life balance might have been actually beneficial. But what I would say is assess all of the things that you know you're good at, but also take a look at some of the things that you feel you're weak at and measure them against other people. Don't be afraid to ask, because sometimes we shy away from the things that we think we're not so good at. And we may actually be with just a little bit of guidance and being open-minded, we might find that we're actually much better than we think. So I think my journey suggests that people should be very open-minded. And a very obvious thing is that we all have some level of sales in us, no matter what we do in our career. And we should always embrace that aspect of it. And no matter what the circumstances are, always keep a good relationship with everyone, the best you can, don't take it personally. And because you never know what happens. I mean, when Rakesh hired me at the point he hired me with KiwiTech, it was a very important part of my life. I had already achieved, I had already been in my 60s. We all know it's harder to get a job at that age. I was not ready to retire, both mentally nor financially. And if it weren't probably not for the way I had treated him as don't forget, he was my vendor.
Right.
And if I hadn't treated them respectfully and worked with them well, why would he have ever wanted to have me as part of his company?
Jerry, truly amazing. I'm so glad you made time to share this with me and to the people who are watching today. Thank you so very much for taking time out of your busy schedule. I look forward to the next 40 or 50 years and
That's so kind of you.
hearing the follow-up to your story.
It's always, yes, thank you so much, David. It is always a pleasure. And thank you so much. It's always an absolute pleasure and privilege to be able to share time with you, sir. So thank you for having me today.